If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Law by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the Masquerade. In this episode, we continue to unravel the mysteries behind the origins, motives, and cultures of the 9 major vampiric bloodlines in the world of darkness. This episode will focus on the Sirens of the Night, the Daughters of Cacophony. I have to admit, Neonate, the priority you place to learn of the Daughters of Cacophony really surprises me. The true Bruja I could understand, hinting at the idea of other species, as it were, of Bruja is a little bit fascinating, and the Barley similarly for their reputation for being the boogeyman of our society, but the Daughters of Cacophony? Don't you think you are scraping the bottom of the barrel for things to discuss? No? I thought not. I suppose they do offer some fascination in these modern nights. A bloodline that can control the masses not through spoken word, but song. Now, it's not as direct as Dominate. Melpomene is a discipline unique to them, and explores the power of the voice, shaking the soul of those nearby, and allowing the Canite to perform sonic feats otherwise impossible. It can even work on those who are deaf if my sources are correct. Such a power would hint them towards them being a Toreador offshoot. But with presence and fortitude at their disposal, some would argue that they are a Ventrue bloodline. Now others would state that the Daughters of Cacophony are a Malkavian bloodline, as certain powers and weaknesses found within Melpomene and the clan, or bloodline I should say, can cause the listeners to go mad through song. But that is the great mystery regarding the Sirens. No one knows which one of the 3 they are a bloodline of, if they are indeed a bloodline spawning from those 3 clans. After all, Melpomene was a muse, an ancient Greek inspirational goddess of literature, science, and the arts. By the very definition, she is considered a source of knowledge materialized in the poetry and lyric songs, her name meaning to sing. Ironically, Melpomene is the muse of tragedy, so perhaps she was an ancient long-forgotten Methuselah, or maybe an antediluvian? Oddly, and almost sadly, that is rarely the point of origin for the bloodline. One of the tales speaks of 3 sisters of incredible vocal talents, each one being embraced by Ventrue, Malkavian, and Toreador. Their parent clans would try and distance them, which in turn would only make them more determined to see each other. They would meet in secret, and they would share their blood, increasing the ties of each other and weaken the ties they had with their sires, somehow developing new powers and skills as they became more than the sum of their parts. Their future childers would don the name the Daughters of Cacophony. The 3 clans mentioned in the tale would describe the development of the Daughters of Cacophony in a different way. The Toreadors would insist that the Sirens would attempt to become like them, lost in a whirlpool of their own melodic ideas and intoxicating harmonies. Others state that this constant need to sing comes from the Malkavians, inflicted by a musical curse, songs and arias they can only hear. The Ventrue, however, have a simpler tale. They developed a taste for musical blood, almost becoming obsessed with it. Another story would insist that a vampire, either a Malkavian, Toreador or Ventrue, wandered into some woods controlled by fae, creatures you would call fairies, and obtained some of their magic, either as a punishment or by some coincidental happenstance. The most popular origin story you have most likely to have heard of, however, is through the works of Malkavian Dr. Rainer Stoczka and his Gentleman's Society for the Rational Investigation of Supernatural Matters during the 1800s. They would experiment on kindred to determine whether common clan traits were psychological in nature. However, as you might expect, the experiments drove their subjects rather mad. One of their charges was a Toreador woman who found the only way to lessen her own pain was to share it with others, through macabre song. Whilst acting as the only concrete answer to the origin story for the Daughters of Cacophony, it is arguably just as false as the others, for there are records stating that the Sirens first appeared in the 1700s, despite me wanting to believe they are considerably older still. But what would a Daughter of Cacophony tell you? A lot of them will share variations of these stories, whilst a large chunk of them, perhaps a good 75% of them, will tell you they are conceived as a weapon, hidden by a sect many kindreds don't know about. You do though. I speak once more of the Tau-Mehe-Ra, the ancient death cult devoted to the worship of a cabal of beings known as the Aralu that slept in the ghostly replica of Enoch. This story has us begin hundreds of years after the fall of Rome and sometime after the Convention of Thorns. A plan was conjured to gather a small body of Toreador who would infiltrate the Ivory Tower. The task was simple: to sing and perform for the creme de la creme of vampiric society, nudging them into insanity, causing the power to crumble from within. The Tau-Mehe-Ra would find some of the best Toreador singers and performers, just so every Elysium would want them. The Tau-Mehe-Ra would collect a Malkavian, or two, to teach them these musical powers. What was arguably overlooked is that when you add a Malkavian to anything, things tend to go tits up eventually. After decades of controlled embraces, careful training and manipulation, these Daughters of Cacophony would become something new, something that the Tau-Mehe-Ra was never truly content with. They were too different to do the job they were created for. Many within the sect wanted to kill these accidents, whilst others thought there could still be some use for them. What would actually happen, in this tale of events at least, is that many would leave the Tau-Mehe-Ra, careful not to betray their former masters and reveal their secrets. I can tell you now that the Tau-Mehe-Ra are the most punishing when it comes to revealing their secrets. Naturally drawn to concert halls and theatres, the Sirens faced a great risk pursuing their new love for performance. Princes, of course, would naturally notice the weird talent of these unusual Toreadors and pulled them in for questioning. The vast majority of the Daughters of Cacophony who left the Tau-Mehe-Ra were the youngest and knew not of their origins. Those who did know, be it an insightful neonate or ancillary embraced into the Tau-Mehe-Ra, kept their mouths shut. The Camarilla would take an interest in the bloodline, to such an extent as inviting them into the sect. It wasn't a tough decision, as I'm sure you could imagine. The Tau-Mehe-Ra did not want the Sirens, and the Camarilla did. Whilst many remained with the Tau-Mehe-Ra, far more said farewell to their masters and joined the Great Yacht Club, taking the secrets with them. Most Sirens within the Camarilla who know of their origins wouldn't share their secrets with you, mainly because they are not interested in the Jihad and do not want their former masters bestowing the final death upon them. Now, you could argue that this was all intentional for the Tau-Mehe-Ra, who were just as interested in destroying the Sabbat and may have let the Daughters of Cacophony go for this very purpose. Or perhaps there was another experiment in the works that has yet to be unmasked. As hinted earlier on, it was the Victorian age and beyond where the bloodline would make a name for themselves. The celebration of music was not just for the upper class and elite anymore. Most middle-class households owned a piano, and it was heavily encouraged for families to gather around the ebonies and ivories for a little sing-song. Concerts and live performances were more common and not so expensive. Many Sirens took centre stage in opera and more intimate performances, chamber-styled performances. A soloist singing Schubert accompanied by a piano surrounded by friends, elders and potential aristocratic vessels. Many Elysiums took this format in London all those many glorious years ago. How I miss those nights. Anyway, these themes were only available due to the development of technology, which would also take some of these elements away from the Sirens. It was around this time that recorded music was being experimented with, and we all know how that would consume the modern culture of the 21st century. Whilst many a modern Daughter of Cacophony is a loud punk rocker or lavish jazz singer, there was a real fear these devices that captured and played music would eliminate the need for any sort of live performances. Did you know there were actual concerts of recorded music that people would attend? It was a fascinating experience, I cannot deny that, but there is something that mere machines and microphones capturing a singular instance of an interpretation of a piece of music cannot conquer the live performance. But I digress. The Daughters of Cacophony do not fight in the Jihad, as I previously mentioned. They are too content with their music. That does not mean they are absent of any conflicts of their own, mind you. Their curse, or the closest thing the Sirens have to a curse, is what they call the fugue. They constantly hear music. Each Daughter of Cacophony has a different sound, constantly running in their head. One hears violins, the other a mezzo-soprano. One may hear the roar of distorted rock guitar, whilst another may be subject to the sound of a Polynesian nose flute. The music is constant, never-ending, and probably maddening to some. I have heard some stories of those who lose themselves totally to the beat due to completely losing themselves to these melodies, becoming whites in the process. The Daughters, however, have their own word for it. I believe they call them banshees. Despite the name The Daughters of Cacophony, they do not exclusively embrace women, although I have had heard those that say otherwise, for the range of a female singer is both greater and more emotionally powerful than that of a man, for which I cannot disagree. The term that I have been told to describe such male daughters is the Sons of Discord. Some take offence to it, whilst others do not, so if you approach a male daughter of Cacophony, perhaps keep this bit of information to yourself. Whether they are male, female, or somewhere in between, Daughters of Cacophony may naturally gravitate themselves toward one of three factions, providing they are not an independent soloist, which is inherently the default of the bloodline. Besides, who wants to be a baritone or an alto when you can be a bass or soprano? Choirsters usually have a great control over melpomene, providing comfort in numbers to those who are struggling with their conflict with the fugue, forming intimate relationships with its members. Many of the bloodline and those who are aware of the sirens worry greatly about their size, as one daughter of Cacophony can cause great damage to one's psyche, but a choir of 40 strong? Many members of the Camarilla wonder what they are hiding, if they are indeed hiding anything, so a group as large as these cause great suspicion. There are some within the bloodline, however, who wish to further understand the nature of the fugue. The Sisters of the Fugue listen to it intently, believing that with a trained ear, one might learn incredible power from it. Some say that one can hear voices beneath the music, voices that share secrets. Then there are the quiet celebrities, who remind me more of the Venture in terms of mindset and behind-the-scenes legwork. They are not so much focused on singing themselves, but this group of sirens controls record labels, venues specializing in media manipulation to help these particular vocal signs who have entered the music industry to remain incognito. After all, the kind would notice at some point that their favorite pop star isn't aging after some time. So you see, Neonate, the Daughters of Cacophony, whilst may not be particularly numerous, they certainly have a larger stronghold than most bloodlines. Whether they are a descendant of the Toreador, Malkavian or Ventrue clan, or some descendant of some long-lost antediluvian, they are surely an interesting one to behold. But there is one question you are probably thinking of that has yet to be explored. Why song? Why is music their vice, weapon and curse? Well, I do not have an absolute answer for you, besides the stories I have presented to you at the beginning of our discussion, but I do have two ideas for you to think upon. Presuming that the Daughters of Cacophony was indeed created as a weapon by the Tamahe-Ra, the sect obviously knew the power of music as a means of internal destruction before the rest of the world. Whilst not terribly well known, it is no secret that a handful of mortal law enforcement use music as a torture interrogation aid. In these modern nights, it usually consists of, that really angry, aggressive metal. Ah yes, death metal, that horrible, angsty, aggressive music paused and played at irregular intervals, preventing the torchy's sleep. Sometimes it is children television theme music, which can be just as draining on one's willpower and mental resistance. The Tamahe-Ra were obviously ahead of their time, using a different tactic to take down the Camarilla, which has yet to come to full fruition, admittedly. Or perhaps it has begun to blossom, and the whole concept of the beckoning is their work? Time will tell, I suppose. As for the second idea, assuming that they are not a weaponized kindred experiment gone wrong, and they are most likely a bloodline of the Toreador, Malkavian, or possibly Ventrue clans, it is fair to assume that these kindred, the Daughters of Cacophony, are more connected to the heartbeat of humanity than the other clans. They are music in kindred form, each one their own instrument, each one feeling the pulse of life different from the next. Each one's fugue shows them something that connects them with the kind, the need and feeling for blood and the song that crescendos in their veins, reaching a large fortissimo, announcing their presence to the whole world, only to diminuendo back into the shadows. An audience in the presence of a Daughter of Cacophony is always left speechless after the good lady sings. To be kept updated, follow the Law by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we will upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.